Connecting to the cloud. Okay, great. So, hello, welcome to everybody. I'm so excited to have Sheila here for our Twin Cities DSA Q&A. My name is Anna. I'm the Twin Cities DSA electoral co-chair, and I will be moderating the Q&A. And Sheila, would you like to kick us off with just like a little bit of an intro and kind of about you and why you're running?
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for being here. My name is Sheila Nezhad. I use she and her pronouns. I grew up in Woodbury, was born in Fargo, and have lived in Minneapolis for the past decade. I'm a community organizer with Reclaim the Block. I also work at Ricardo Levin's Morales Art Studio. I am a renter, a queer woman, and in the multi-hyphen mixed-raced crew. Shout out to my mom and dad. And I'm running, so I have this poster that's hanging next to my desk, and it's a quote from Audre Lorde that says, "Revolution is not a one-time event." We, the people here in Minneapolis, started a worldwide revolution. And even before that, our neighbors were coming together in mass to take care of one another when COVID hit. I had the opportunity to work with some DSA members doing mutual aid work at encampments a year ago now. What I saw in community last year and for years is that the people of Minneapolis were bold, were creative, and were doing what needed to be done. And I know that electoral politics will never be the be all and end all of our liberation. That lies with the people. But this past year drove home to me that it does matter who's in office. This year, with widespread transformation on the ground, I was baffled by how our elected leaders offered us crumbs and made us battle for incremental change. My campaign is called Sheila for the People because I want elected leaders who make it easier for everyday people to get involved in the decisions that affect our lives. And I come from a background of organizing around building real safety and moving away from violent policing. I've spent years at City Hall working specifically on that issue. And I'm ready to bring that vision and that plan into the mayor's office. So I will stop there because I think you all have a lot of really wonderful questions for me, but I'm just so grateful to be here with you all. And I have to mention my personal motto, which is from the streets to the spreadsheets. So if you got hyper wonky, nerdy questions, bring them on. I'm so excited to talk about them with you.
Thank you, Sheila. And for the couple of folks who joined kind of as Sheila was doing her intro, we're going to start with the questions that we got via the Every Action form that was sent out to members. But if you have questions that are coming up for you as Sheila is talking, please use the Q&A box underneath the videos to submit your questions, and I will read the Q&A questions after the form questions. Cool. So let's kick it off. So our first question. Minneapolis has a notoriously weak mayoral position. What would you say to someone who is skeptical of the strategic importance of the mayor's office to the movements for rent control, against policing, et cetera?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure thing. Minneapolis has a notoriously weak mayoral position. What would you say to someone who is skeptical of the strategic importance of the mayor's office in the movements for rent control, against policing, et cetera?
Okay, great. So if I'm interpreting this question right, it's getting towards this strong mayor amendment that is going to be on the ballot this year, which was brought forth by the Charter Commission, which would move supervision and more power over departments away from the council and under the mayor's office, and would make it that the city council could no longer enforce staff directions, asking staff to do things such as research items, research pilot projects, etc. I am concerned about the Strong Mayor Amendment as someone who is running for mayor, because in Minneapolis, and I am hoping that I will be the exception to the rule, but often mayors are wealthier and whiter than those who are elected to council. And a lot of that has to go into the simple fact that it costs a lot of money to run a mayor's race. And so the pool of candidates who we get as mayor often don't represent the communities who are most deeply impacted by the services and actions of City Hall, policing, rent control, et cetera. So I would, but I do see, so the reason that this has come up as an issue is an argument that staff are pulled in too many different directions and are not able to do their jobs because of that. And I have seen that problem in practice working at City Hall for years. And I think that the solution, though, is not concentrating power under one person. Rather, it is adding resources where they are currently lacking in terms of staff capacity. So not asking departmental staff to have to both be researchers, policy researchers, and sorry, my phone is doing a weird buzzing thing. Okay, I've been having technological issues all day. Please bear with me, y'all, and I can't see any of you, but so that's all to say, I believe in systems that have greater accountability built in. And I think part of that is having power with the council and not concentrated under the mayor.
Awesome. All right, our next question. The NPR News / Star Tribune / Care 11 poll on defunding the police in August 2020 showed that a majority of those polled were not in favor of reducing the size of the Minneapolis police force and felt that fewer police would have a negative impact on public safety. There were more Black than white residents who gave these responses. What is your outreach plan to BIPOC Minneapolis residents who do not support defunding the police? How will you convince them to vote for you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, there's a lot of things that went into that poll, but I don't think that's the root of your question there. So I think that we need to carry the multiplicity of experiences with safety and policing as we go into this next council and mayor leadership. And by that, I mean shifting the conversation from policing to safety. Because when we start talking about what makes us feel safe, we start talking about things like having access to housing that's dignified, that you can afford to live in, having access to enough income to live well, having access to youth programming, to good education. All of these things contribute to safer neighborhoods. And as a candidate, I've been having a lot of discussions, right, with people who have all sorts of different opinions about policing, all sorts of different experiences about policing. And my approach to convincing them to vote for me is not, it's about meeting people where they're at and hearing what is it that they need, that they want solved. And if we're thinking about the issue of violence and harm that's happening, some people see policing as a solution to reducing those things. I don't see the evidence for that as a solution. And so what I've been doing is trying to have conversations about building solutions that work.
Awesome, thank you. Somewhat relatedly, do you support the abolition of police?
I think we should all be abolitionists, because abolition only happens in a world where everyone has their basic needs met and where we have developed ways of addressing harm and violence that don't use guns or cages. I think that is absolutely the world that we should be building towards.
So, next question. How do you feel about a requirement for public safety officials to live in the communities they serve? For example, less than 50% of MPD live within Minneapolis. Should it be required that a majority of our public safety officials live within the city they serve?
Thank you. That's a question I get a lot in my work with Reclaim the Block and MPD 150 as an idea of one of the sort of reforms that might reduce police violence. And I have not seen a lot of evidence that that actually reduces police violence. And that's because of the same reason that having more officers of color or female officers does not reduce police violence, is because of the endemic violence and racism of the system overpowers any sort of individual inclinations. And also, I think tangibly of examples of Rikia Boyd was killed by an officer who lived in her neighborhood, who walked her beat every day. So what I would like to see instead of residency requirements is shifting. We're talking about building community relationships with city staff who provide services, shifting those services outside of MPD and into the departments that would specialize in them. So if we're talking about making sure youth feel safer, investing more in youth programming rather than investing in officers who are paid to play sports with kids.
Wonderful. Heads up for folks who are attendees that this is our last every action form question specifically for Sheila. We have some general questions for all the candidates, but if you have questions that you would like to ask, feel free to throw those in the Q&A right now so we have them ready to roll after this question, and we will shift to those and then go back to the questions that were for everyone from the form. So just a heads up. Okay, so Hennepin County recently raised the minimum wage to $20 for all county employees. Would you do that immediately for Minneapolis, in addition to changing the slow rollout of the $15 minimum wage to be effective immediately and increasing the slow rollout minimum to $20 by 2024?
That is a wonderful and very specific question. I definitely support raising the minimum wage. I need to do some research into the mayor's power versus the council power versus the current legislation, but I'm going to put that on my research list. I was a restaurant worker for 10 years, so I know what it's like to work for minimum wage. And I remember what happened when 15 was passed, but I still wasn't making 15, right? So would definitely support increasing the minimum wage and increasing it faster, because I know, as someone who is also a renter, that rental prices have gone up a lot faster than the increase in the rollout of the $15 minimum wage. So thank you for that question.
Sure thing. Okay, we have a couple questions now from attendees. First question, in the questionnaire, you answered no to question 42. Would you oppose allowing local law enforcement officers to suppress protests, ... That seems inconsistent with what I know of you. Would you be able to clarify your stance?
Oh, I think that must have been an error, perhaps in the wording of the question, and I apologize for that. And I'll follow up with my team on that one. I would oppose use of less lethal quote unquote less lethal weapons or violence. I mean, I've been shot by MPD with tear gas canisters. Absolutely would oppose that. I apologize for that error.
There you go. And we have been able to have folks like amend their questionnaires for things like this. So we can totally do that. That's no problem.
Great. I'm glad to see they read the questionnaire though. Thank you for that.
I know. Yeah, all like 100 pages of folks' answers. Okay, our next question. Why did you let Fry claim success on housing without pushing back at the forums on Saturday? Did you know Minneapolis could easily build thousands of units of affordable public housing without a net cost to the budget? Are you interested in learning how?
Okay, let's take portion number one. Why did you let Fry claim successes on housing without pushing back at the forums on Saturday? I did push back on his claims of success. I did raise examples of how homelessness has been on the rise despite his claim to end homelessness in 10 years. I have firsthand experience as someone who did mutual aid work at encampments. My closest friends do street outreach work with Southside Harm Reduction, have seen over and over again the ways that we have to fight for things as simple as porta potties, whereas we're seeing prioritization of gentrification in the city. So would I be interested in learning how we could build public housing? Absolutely. I am a big supporter of public housing, would like to see greater investment in public housing, in new public housing, and also in improved funds for maintaining current public housing, and would love to connect. And you can email me at info@sheilaforthepeople.com. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to flip back to the general questions from the forum since we have moved through the open questions that folks had, but folks who are attending, feel free to keep adding questions in and I'll keep checking them as we go. Can you tell us about what your approach to community engagement will be and how you will bring the movement to City Council?
Yeah, wonderful. So like I mentioned, my campaign is called Sheila for the People. That's why I'm doing it. I have been in the movement for over a decade, got my start in LGBT rights and LGBT health, and have been focusing on policing and building alternatives to policing and building holistic safety for the last 5 years. So some things that we can do can be to start really small, like day one in the mayor's, maybe not day one, month one. Things move slowly in the bureaucracy. But so the city has all of these wonderful advisory committees already right now, but we don't get great representation out of them because they are almost entirely volunteer positions. We have 700 volunteers for the city for all of these advisory committees that are on things that affect the lives of people living in Minneapolis. So I would fight for stipended positions on advisory committees so people don't have to choose between picking up a shift and having their voices heard on those in those existing venues, right? That's where we can build that from existing infrastructure. I would also like us to start participatory budgeting. We have seen really great programs being led in Seattle, in Portland on participatory budgeting. It's a great first step of making steps towards co-governance in the city. And so I think those are great starting points. And at a more basic level, I think it's also about who does the mayor ask for advice when they have a question, when they don't know the answer to something, when they're wondering, what does the community want? And what I've witnessed working at the city with Reclaim the Block and as an organizer is that too often our elected leaders turn to those who know best practices or are subject matter experts, which are usually people with PhDs who don't live here, right? Whereas there is a lot of good organizing that's happening on the ground. A lot of you watching here and part of the DSA chapter are doing that organizing. So as mayor, the first person I would turn to would not be the quote unquote subject matter experts at whatever university or think tank or whatever it is. It would be folks on the ground and the reason I want to go to them and know to go to them is because of my years of experience working in the community.
Awesome. All right, we have another live Q&A question. How would you further the goal of citywide rent control as mayor?
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, cool. So I definitely support rent control, the charter amendment, which opens the path right towards creating ordinances towards rent control, and would be supportive of the Minneapolis United for Rent Control 6-point plan and the accompanying ordinances they have. As mayor, would support that. It needs to go through the council, but I would, sign it into law and work for supportive infrastructure, such as fully funding a enforcement board, funding more tenant education. I think is going to be a huge bump, because we know that big landlords love to intimidate tenants, right? And make them think that they don't have the rights that they do, right? So fully funding that, putting that in the budget, I think could be my role as mayor to support the movement for rent control.
Wonderful. Keep the Q&A questions coming, folks. Switching back to the forum. What are your thoughts on the future of the Blue Line extension?
Oh yeah, great question. I've met with a number of people about that throughout the campaign, and I am very supportive of the community organizing that's happening around anti-gentrification policies to accompany whatever development comes, because we know that there is a huge threat of gentrification and displacement of current communities along the proposed route of the Blue Line. So would be very supportive of that. I'd also be supportive of more business incubator kind of funding around that corridor to help small businesses, BIPOC-owned businesses to open and also to thrive in that area. Yeah, thank you.
What should the city do differently to create safer streets?
Oh, wonderful. I'm just so delighted by all these questions. Safer streets, yes. So to create safer streets, we need to make it safer for people to get around by multiple modes, right? Bus, bike, walk, roll, drive. So definitely in support of traffic slowing measures. I think I have a dream of a municipal shoveling program. I have one of my very best friends walks with a cane and moved out of Minneapolis because the city was inaccessible to her for 6 months of the year. And I deeply miss her. And we could pretty simply solve that and also create some great jobs. And as someone who has studied the city budget to an extreme degree, I know that we do have the funds to make that possible as well.
Wonderful. Audience question, attendee question. How do you feel the future of the former 3rd Precinct site should be handled?
Oh, great. I think that it needs to be a community-driven process of how it's going to be changed in its use. I don't think it should become any sort of precinct again. And I also think that we need to make sure we allow enough time in the decision-making process so that as many voices can be heard as possible in deciding in what comes next, right? So it shouldn't just be top business leaders in the area or the folks whose voices are the loudest right now. And so I think that an iterative community engagement process that's designed by community. I've been really inspired by the community-led research process coming out of Seattle. There's a Black-led group called King County Equity Now that does really great community participatory research. I think that we could use a model like that for deciding what to do with the site, because this is monumental, right? It's not just about land or a building. It's about how do we craft our city spaces, our city infrastructure in a way that feeds the soul of the community, and cares for us holistically. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and we need to make sure that we take the time and give it the resources it needs to be able to be done right.
Awesome. Couple attendee questions here. First off, how would you approach the city climate action plan? What would you like to do about it, and what needs improvement?
I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm having some tech issues.
No worries. Take as long as you need.
Okay, things are like freezing and then coming back up.
All good. Just let me know when you're ready to roll.
Okay.
And if attendees want to take this time to add in some more questions in the Q&A roster, one came in right now. We love to see it. Keep them coming. And just so folks know, we will be wrapping up at 8:30. So this will be an hour-long event. We've got about a half hour left.
All right. Okay. I think I'm back. Am I back?
You're back. You've been, in fact, here this whole time on my end, at least. But...
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I have had such a time today, y'all. I cannot wait to be doing these things in person outside.
Same here.
So, okay. So what needs improvement? I think, when looking broadly at climate issues in the city, they cannot be separated from issues of racial justice. So one of the things I'm really excited about that's happening this week is the city's potential to fund the East Phillips Indoor Urban Farm. I think that is a perfect example of the type of climate and racial justice work that we should be doing in the city right now. And also the Upper Harbor Terminal site, right? There's a lot of potential there for work that both advances climate justice and racial justice as well.
Wonderful. We have another question. Would you be in favor of raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy, like in Seattle, to help in funding supports for people at the bottom end of the income spectrum?
Yes, I would.
Perfect. Do you want to say anything more? I'm not cutting you off, am I, if we go to the next one?
I think, yeah, I'm in favor of raising taxes on corporations, raising taxes on the rich. I think there's some great work being pushed at the state level right now. And I would, as mayor, be interested, fight for progressive property taxation, because right now it's working class homeowners who are paying a greater portion of their wealth towards property taxes than wealthy folks, right, who actually saw a decrease this year in their property taxes. And we're seeing the effects of gentrification, like even the proposed Upper Harbor Terminal site, leading to increased property values and greater cost burden for low-income homeowners. So would fight for progressive taxation there as well.
Awesome. As mayor, there are lots of areas you have influence over without direct jurisdiction / authority, Minneapolis Public Schools, Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, etc. How will you advance justice in cooperation with other governing bodies?
Yeah, thank you. We saw an example of this not happening this week, right? With the mayor vetoing the park board's decision to not have state troopers be using their facilities. So I would approach it from a lens of coalition building, right? And I think that is a huge role of the mayor in general, is coalition building, because of the soft power role. So between not only these different entities of Minneapolis government, but also with county and state government. And part of that is laying out a strong vision at the beginning of the year, the mayor's term, right? And so I would work to get on the same page as much as possible with other entities at the beginning so that we can build throughout the year together in cooperation, rather than coming to these big decision-making points and then clashing and things not being able to move forward. So I think operating from that place of a shared vision and recognizing also all of the ways that these different entities can work together. Just because they don't have to doesn't mean that they can't, right? So I think that's part of it as well.
Wonderful. What approaches to public safety do others, mayor or council member candidates or other leaders, point to that might sound good or appeal to certain constituencies, but aren't effective in practice?
Thank you for this question. So the first thing that comes to mind is reforms. So one of the things that I've done in my role in Reclaim the Block and also MPD 150 is study the history of policing and the history of attempted reforms. And not only in Minneapolis, but around the country, we've tried all of the same sorts of reforms, right? So we've tried civilian review councils. In Minneapolis, we've had 5 of them. We've tried body cameras. We've tried better training. Actually, the first major elected official who introduced the idea of having better training as a way to address the police violence that was happening at the time was Harry Truman. So we've been really trying these same reform attempts for over 70 years and haven't seen an impact on police violence, right? We see just our police budgets have gotten larger every year. So I can see why it can seem appealing, right? Because it's a lot less intimidating to think that, okay, we need to change the behavior of 1 or 2 people in this department in order to get to a safer practice than to say, hey, this department endemically commits violence, not only direct violence, but also violence of channeling people into prisons and the criminal legal system. And as such, we need to develop alternative ways of keeping one another safe that do not rely on this model. So it is tempting to look at reform, but as a candidate and an organizer and a person who works with my neighbors to build community safety, I know that we can and must look at new ways of creating safety and not falling back on these tempting solutions that won't actually lead to people being safer, especially Black and Native and POC folks in Minneapolis.
Great. Who are some current elected officials / movement leaders who you admire or would like to model your leadership on?
Oh, wonderful. One of my personal heroes is actually my coworker, Ricardo Levins Morales. And Ricardo likes to talk about, and he has a little zine on his website too, about sun spaces and moon spaces. And he talks about how sometimes politicians think that they are the sun spaces, they're the sources of power. But in fact, those sun spaces are on the ground, they're in the factories, they're in the unions, they're in the organizing movements of people on the street. And politicians, elected leaders, they're the moon spaces. They're reflecting back the power that comes from the people onto the realm of governance. So that's something I've been trying to hold as a candidate politician is living into that moon space and would like to bring that into office with me.
Lovely. All right, shifting back to some of our forum questions. What kind of work would you push forward at the city in order to protect workers and build worker power?
Yeah, all right. So I got to do a little bit of work on this with my part on the people's budget, which we did last fall as part of the budget process, and working with Satul on worker protections and what better worker protections would look like. So I would love to see, as mayor, more funding about for labor enforcement investigators, I believe is what they are called. So we have some labor protection laws in Minneapolis, right? And we have the minimum wage, but these laws and protections are only as good as the knowledge of people that they have the right to those things, right? And so I would love to see more funding into that. Would love to see more funding in general to community groups to be able to do power building with folks on the ground, with working class folks. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. We have a follow-up question about the climate action plan. The primary aspects of the climate action plan right now are focused on moving electricity to zero emissions and reducing emissions from natural/fossil gas use. How do or should those strategies intersect with racial justice, or how else should they be pursued?
All right, so, okay, so I think a great example of the intersection of fossil fuel and racial justice is stopping line 3, right? So part of my family comes from Fond du Lac, which line 3 goes directly through our ancestral land there, and is an example of how our behavior as a city impacts not only BIPOC communities here, but also BIPOC communities around the state. So I would love to see a mayor and frankly, more state officials standing up and taking a stance against that. I think as mayor, I would use the 2024 energy renegotiations as a chance to really hold big utility corporations accountable and really push for fair utility prices for people in Minneapolis. I'm interested in exploring the municipalization of energy in Minneapolis. And I'm looking at this question one more time. Yeah, so I think they're intrinsically intertwined, if that is the question of environmental justice and racial justice. And I think if whatever the city is doing or whatever entity is doing is not considering those, it's not including everyone at the table. And I think we see that right again with the Roof Depot site, where the alternative proposition is a water storage for materials for water treatment, which does impact the natural resources in the city in a way, but does not, in fact, advance racial justice.
Okay, wonderful. We got another Q&A question. Would you be supportive of transitioning Minneapolis off of natural gas by 2030?
Thank you for this question. All right, strong climate contingent here. Love it. I am interested in this. I need to do a little bit more research about what that timeline would look like. Would love to have people dropping resources in the chat. Would love to learn a little bit more about what it would take to make that happen.
Wonderful. And as Sheila mentioned, yeah, somebody added the Ricardo Levins Morales piece that Sheila was referencing in the chat, so check that out. And I believe recordings to Zooms like include the chat also. So that should be in there in the recording. Wonderful, back to form questions. So if the charter amendment to create a Department of Public Safety controlled by the City Council does not pass and the mayor remains in control of the police, what are 3 concrete changes that you would push to, well, you wouldn't actually have to push to pass. This is phrased for council candidates, that you would just pass as the mayor in order to change how MPD operates?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, there's so many ways. So my broad strategy approach to public safety is, number 1, demilitarize. So we can start in the police budget by looking at the Special Operations Department, which is around $8 million. That's riot gear, SWAT gear, surveillance, all of the things that is direct violence against our communities. Demilitarization, decriminalization of drugs, sex work, poverty, homelessness. That requires lobbying with the state as well, right? Decrim, demilitarization, building up alternatives to scale, and addressing the underlying causes of violence and harm, right? By meeting people's basic needs. So that's the broader vision, if you're curious about that. When I am first getting into the mayor's office, what I would focus on is those kind of initial immediate steps that we could take towards demilitarization, towards shifting money into what people desperately need to be safe, right? Because we need to hold, or I would like to hold the concept of safety, not just addressing policing, but how are we addressing safety in Minneapolis? So that means moving emergency safety funding into things like housing, into, I mean, by the time we get into January 2022, we're going to be deep in a mental health crisis across the city. And we know, or at least folks who are maybe like me, who are queer or mixed race or of any other group that mainstream therapists don't quite get it often, right? It's hard to find appropriate mental health care. So moving money into appropriate mental health care is also going to be a huge part. A huge barrier to changing the MPD right now is the union contract. And, you know, perhaps it's over a year expired at this point. Perhaps they will have renewed it by the time the next council and mayor in office. But if not, it will. I studied it as a part of, we kind of formed a coalition when it was first about to be expired and studied it. And it will take 2 rounds of revision to be able to make substantive changes, accountability measures, because it is built, it's an ironclad contract to protect policing right now. And so I think the more transparent we can make that process, the easier it will be for us to build public pressure to change the contract. Now I'm hoping that the charter amendment does pass and that we get to start building towards the world that we want to live in right away. But if not, I think getting started on that demilitarization and rapid mobilization of resources towards safety emergencies in the city is a huge part of shifting away from violent policing.
Wonderful. So speaking of hoping that the charter amendment passes, can you speak to why you, as a mayoral candidate, you are in support of the Yes for Minneapolis or the city council version of the public safety charter amendment that would shift power away from the mayor and to the city council?
Yeah. So right now, our charter has us kind of locked into a bad contract. So under the current charter, it lists out what departments we are required to have as a city. So there's fire department, there's the council, and there's the police department as a required department. And it also has a mandatory minimum number of policing. So we're really locked into what we can do, the realm of possibilities related to how we address safety in the city. So I support the charter amendment because I believe that we need the flexibility to be able to craft systems of safety based on what's actually needed in the community, not a policing first approach. So the charter amendment does not establish what that new approach will be. That's not charter material. The charter is basically the outline, and then through ordinances, through lawmaking that happens through the council and the mayor, that's how we shape what goes into that next step. And I believe that is the appropriate way, right? Because that allows for more public participation. It allows us to adapt as times change. But the important part of the charter amendment is that it opens the path for us to move away from that policing first approach. And I have been a core member of the Yes for Minneapolis since the beginning. And before that, its previous iteration working on the charter. So I have studied the charter in and out and really deeply believe that this is the first step towards changing the way that we build safety in Minneapolis.
Awesome. So we have another attendee question. And just as a heads up for folks, we have about 10 minutes left, and we'll do just a quick summary of like, what are the next steps in the endorsement process at the end. So we'll end the questions just a little before 8:30. So get any questions in if you got them. We have time for probably 1 or 2 more after this one. So follow up on history of police reform, if time, yes, there's time. Are there specific public safety measures that are being promoted or pursued already that are not being implemented in a fully effective way? I heard you speak in the fall about how the Office of Violence Prevention, for example, is too closely tied to MPD and not the shining example it's held up as so far.
Thank you. Yeah, it's complicated. I think I was probably talking about the gun violence intervention program, which is a very effective program that's run through the Office of Violence Prevention. And it's like a wraparound program for folks who either come into the hospital with a gunshot wound or are somehow deemed at risk, high risk of being involved in gun violence. And this program helps people connect with services. And the most important part of it is that it has like a one-to-one support component, so that if someone is feeling stressed out, if a situation is getting hot, or like they're about to get evicted, they have someone that they can text and de-escalate that situation. But it does also include a law enforcement component, which is not something that I support. So I think that so I'm looking at this question again. Yeah, I think we also have some solutions that have been funded that aren't funded at the scale that we need. I think that gets to this question. And an example of that will be these mobile mental health response teams, which we fought tooth and nail. I know some people on this call were in that fight. We fought tooth and nail for these mobile mental health response teams that don't involve police, that aren't co-responders. And but what we won was 2 24/7 teams. And if there are more than 2 mental health crises at one time in Minneapolis, then police are dispatched to those calls. So I think also what's happening right now is some of these, and those aren't reforms, right? They're alternatives, but they're not being set up to succeed, right? And if there were a conservative council or mayor in the future, they could pull the data and say, well, see, this didn't have any impact on rates of police violence, so we should just go back to the old model, right? So one thing I would like to do as mayor in my budget is propose funding these alternatives at the scale that we need, rather than kind of setting them up to fail. Oh yeah, Tess, I see you in the chat here talking about the violence interrupters. Yeah, there was one team, it was a whole mess. I don't know that I can speak on it directly. I think I would encourage folks to maybe do some research on it. There was like a kettling that happened at the 5th Precinct, and the Minneapolis team was there, but they were kind of brand new and it was unclear how they got instruction, how to get there. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Let's do maybe one more question. We'll see how time goes. What do you think the future of George Floyd Square should be?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the future of George Floyd Square should be determined by the community that lives in and around George Floyd Square. So I think that there are a lot of really great, very tangible, very concrete next steps that are outlined in the 24 demands from George Floyd Square. I am disappointed in the current mayor's approach of not meeting those demands and instead pushing to reopen the square. I think that George Floyd Square is already an example of what true community care and mutual aid looks like in practice, and what we can build when we have spaces for real, genuine neighborhood connection, right? And so I believe that the city should support the direction of those who are living there. And I know that there are a lot of conflicting opinions too in that neighborhood, right? And it gets to the same question as with the 3rd Precinct site of, are we giving enough time and resources for people to make self-determined decisions? Or are we just sending out a survey and saying that's the community engagement and that's what should be used to inform pretty massive decisions? So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so we are just about at time here. So I'm going to do a quick wrap up of kind of what the Tess, I see your question. We'll see if we have time. I'm going to do a quick wrap up of what the next steps in the endorsement process will be, just so that folks on the call and folks watching this later know. So we are in the process of doing our Q&As with all of the candidates who are seeking endorsement from Twin Cities DSA right now. We're about halfway through. Sheila is the only mayoral candidate who is seeking the TCDSA endorsement. So it's not a like Sheila versus someone else question. It's a like Sheila versus no endorsement question, basically. So all of those questions and discussions about candidates, the greatest place to have them is in the electoral channel of the TCDSA Slack. So feel free to get conversations going there, jump into conversations that are already happening. And the other place that we are going to be having those conversations is in the endorsement meeting, which will be an all-member meeting that will be coming up in the next few weeks here. We are still in the process of scheduling when that will be. But keep an eye out for that. There will be emails and Slacks and folks about that. So you will hopefully find out about it. And then we will be making our endorsement decisions via an all-member OPA vote. And then we will be starting up campaigns for the candidates we endorse. So that's the process. Thank you so much to folks who are here getting plugged in. Yes, there are so many Slack channels, Edison. And Sheila, with the last couple minutes that we have, do you want to just give a quick wrap up for folks?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and thank you for your work with DSA. I am seeking the DSA endorsement because I deeply align with the values of the DSA chapter that I've seen in practice here in Minneapolis in my years of organizing, and would be honored to receive the endorsement. And yeah, I really trying to capture what is exactly that I want to say. I feel like some people have assumed that the mayoral race is inevitably going to go to those who have the most money or the most access to traditional channels of power. And I am committed to proving them wrong, because I believe that those people also likely did not believe that the everyday people of Minneapolis would start a worldwide revolution. So I hope that I can earn your support. I hope that you can help me build that momentum with our team, build channels into city government to make sure that the movement is heard, that people are really heard, that we have access to change policies that affect our lives, and making sure that we have city services that serve everyone. So I would love to hear more and connect with y'all. We have upcoming campaigns events called Policy by the People, or you can reach out to us through the website, SheilaForThePeople.com. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheila, for taking the time to be here. And thank you so much to all the attendees for also taking time to be here. Really appreciate it. And keep an eye out for more Q&As to come. All right.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.